Hello and welcome back to another episode with Tectonic Ministries. Joining us again is Mark Johnson. Pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining us on the last one, and looking forward to having another crack at this pretty epic topic. We're now following on from what we were talking about in the last episode, discussing essentially who will be responsible for basically wiping out a third of mankind. Who will do it? What are the signs? How do we know this is even to be given any credence, paid attention to? We're going to move from, we were reading previously in Revelation, we're going to move from Revelation and actually jump back into the Old Testament and look in Daniel. And the reason for doing so is because we were actually just discussing this before we started. There's a lot of imagery and a lot of symbolism in these scriptures that, as you were saying, Mark, unless you actually delve into it and seek it out and really seek to understand it, it can just look like this just mashup of some would think it was some sort of weird they've taken
fantasy movie.
Yeah. or they've gone on some sort of psychedelic and just had some weird vision. But when you actually take into the fact that, and Dan, you brought this up again in the previous podcast, and we've said it previously, and we'll probably say it again, that 80% of all the prophecy in Scripture has already come to pass, and the remaining is pretty much about what we're discussing at the moment. And one of the premises that we base the argument on for the understanding that this hasn't yet come to pass, or it is to yet come into the future, is the basis of all the other prophecies have been fulfilled, essentially, to the letter, and yet we haven't seen what's coming about. So if we take into consideration the validity of Scripture and its consistency in its accuracy, we can see that everything up until a certain point has already come to pass. And then from the prophecies that are foretold in Revelation, they actually haven't, there's not actually been a physical capability for those things to come about up until pretty much now. So just kind of, again, we like to take it back to why do we believe this, and why do we want to actually expound on this and even spend time worrying about it, is because of what we can see is the accuracy of Scripture, and then also the importance of what's written here. So taking into consideration that we were in Revelation, which was written approximately 2,000 years ago. Now we're looking back in Daniel, which is Old Testament, which is thousands of years prior to that. We're seeing the same symbology. We're seeing the same imagery come through that can be directly related to those things. So we're going to start off in Daniel 7. You start with the scripture, or do you want to kind of intro where we're going to head with this one?
No, I mean, let's start with the scripture, and then we'll break it down from there.
Yep. Okay. So Daniel 7. So again, like I mentioned before, for those not particularly familiar with the Bible, this is actually Old Testament now, where Revelation is actually the last book in the New Testament. This is Daniel, which is prior to Christ's first coming. Daniel chapter 7, we got here verses 7 to 8 is where we'll start, and then we'll keep working through from there. After this I looked in the night, visions, and there before me was a fourth animal, dreadful, horrible, extremely strong, and with great iron teeth. It devoured, crushed, and stamped its feet on what was left. What was left is a reference to the destruction of the first quarter of humanity. And again, we discussed this in the previous podcast, and we'll, I'm sure, expound on that further in the future. So it's talking about now where we're discussing wiping out the 1/3 of the remaining after the first quarter has been wiped out. So you have to come with us on the journey, because obviously, like we said, there's a lot of stuff to really unpack. So it says here, and it crushed and stamped its feet on what was left. It was different from all animals that had gone before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was considering the horns, another horn sprang up among them, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. In this horn were eyes like human eyes, and a mouth speaking arrogantly.
So we look at Daniel 7. The whole chapter is all about what the world will look like, what we can expect just before Jesus comes back. Then it goes into Jesus coming back, handed the books, judgment's open, everyone has to stand before the judgment seat of Jesus Christ. What Scripture tells us, what Daniel tells us, is what he saw was what John saw in the Revelation. He saw exactly the same thing that John saw in Revelation 4 and 5, where John describes heaven, the throne room of God. Daniel sees it here, and he's describing here there are 4 beasts. The first beast is the lion with eagle's wings, and the eagle's wings are clipped and it stands up like a man. There's a thought on that and a theology on that. The second beast is the the bear laying on its side with 3 ribs in its mouth. We can take that as Russia. Russia's always been the bear. The third one is the panther, and that's the emblem for Muslim, for the Islamic people. The fourth one is in some different interpretations or some different types of the Bible, different, what do you call them? Translations of the Bible. It's called a griffin, it's called a dragon, it's called all of these different names. But it's this beast that is going to trample, we just read, on the earth. When you read it, you line up with what we just read in Revelation before. This is this beast that is going to kill a third of mankind. It then fits in perfectly when you go through the seals, the trumpets and the bowls, because the fourth seal, trumpet and bowl, the fifth seal, trumpet and bowl, a quarter of the world population is killed through wars and through... It's another teaching, and we'll go into that teaching. So what it says here clearly was that it will tread on what is left. This beast, this one that will kill a third of mankind, will tread on a third of what is left. So if we talked about this, if there's 8 billion people here now and a quarter of the world's population is annihilated, and look, we don't talk about this lightly. I mean, this is horrific. This is not what any of us want to see, but it's man's rebellion against God has brought him to this point of self-destruction. Then we're reading after that where we're looking at that has happened. What happens now? We read in Revelation what we read before 9, and it's the 6th trumpet. So it's this next period of time where a third has been killed. So the scriptures tell us it was different to all other animals that had gone before it. It has 10 horns. 3 of those horns are plucked up by 1 horn that rises up. And we read in Revelation 13:3, it talks about the horn that was struck and came back. And so you bring these two together, and it's a very big piece of the puzzle. So what have we witnessed in recent time in our world? We have witnessed where basically communism was wiped out. When after the Cold War and then the rise of America and the downfall of the Soviet Union and all the countries going back to having control of their own country, Hungary, Poland, all of these countries moved away from communism, and Russia lost control. And then it looked like in the world communism was wiped out. And then all of a sudden we're sitting in this world and communism has come back with a vengeance. It has got its way into everywhere. It has just infiltrated through various means into every Western society. One country has got control of 49 out of 54 countries in Africa. It has control of every country in South America other than Argentina. And it's control. It's a communist country. So we are witnessing, we have been witnessing, we are witnessing prophecy being fulfilled. You can see it every day if you read your newspaper and watch what's happening in our world. So we read here where this beast speaks arrogantly in Revelation 13:3. It was struck and came back, and I saw one of its heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marvelled and followed the beast. We are watching that happening now today in our world. We've watched it happen for the last 30, 40 years. I can remember I can't believe, I'm staggered by how much control communism now has of Australia. It's just frightening, incredible. And I never would have thought I would have seen this in my lifetime, but we just now had an election and you're just watching, wow. And they've got a formula that works, and they get control of one government after another government after another government. They infiltrate and they get control.
So in essence, Dan, what does that mean, communism, one step at a time, one bit at a time, they're taking over? So what does that look like in reality, especially for Australia or the nations that communism has taken over? Is it sort of, like you're saying, getting more power and rule over the people? Like, what's the goal of communism?
Well, they want total control, like Islam wants total control.
Right.
And they both use almost very similar policies. Islam have a policy, get in and breed and breed and breed, and more Muslims, and then you get control, and we're watching it. Or you let down your borders in any way, shape or form, and they're in. And the next minute, you don't have control of your country. And we're witnessing that in country after country all around the world. Europe, England, Ireland, go through it. Now they're all trying to shut the doors, and it's all a little bit late. So we've watched where communism and the communist countries use various ways of infiltration. You get a hold of the universities. You get a hold of the media. We've seen that firsthand. You get a hold of the political party leaders. It's just, I get astounded at how you buy a prime minister or a president you can buy them. We've seen that in so many countries. And I've said this before. Imagine if I were a politician and I had great ambitions of being a leader of a country, and I was really on the way up. And I was approached by someone that said, look, we can get you in and they'll never get you out. Would you like to know how to do that? They would just jump in like that. That's what's happened. We now, in Australia, sadly, you will never get now Labor out of government. It will be impossible. We are now facing where 37% of the budget in Australia, our annual budget, 37% is spent on social welfare, social security.
37%?
37% of our national budget. Who are they all going to vote for? Our bureaucracy is so big, so heavy, so overloaded. It is massive. They're never going to vote for anyone.
So there's a sort of like a dependence. They're sort of setting this up so that you have to depend upon the system. But is this beast also an entity? Because they're looking at it from a beast perspective, because we're not just talking about an individual here, we're talking about some kind of spiritual power hiding behind what we would see as communism. Because the Antichrist spirit somewhere is involved in all this as well, because it's opposing the doctrines of Christ, it's opposing the church, in particular, Israel. It's very blatant too.
Yeah, it's essentially replacing God with the state. And in order to do that, as what Dan was just saying, we see essentially socialism is the gateway to communism. Socialism is essentially, at the core of it, a dependence on the state itself. And how do you gain dependence? So, well, one way is to remove civil liberties, and another is to essentially bribe. And that's what we're seeing. And I believe it's almost one gives and the other takes. It's almost like a bribe and then a removal. So, well, because we've paid you for this, we'll take that. And it's like, oh, well, hang on. Oh, it's too late. Well, I'm now dependent on that weekly, monthly or yearly subsidy or payment or whatever it is. And you can't actually, it's every time someone stands up and says, hang on a sec, I think I should be able to do that for myself, they're crushed. And, you see all the propaganda on, they're a right-wing fascist they're trying to overthrow the government, and all they're saying is, no, well, I actually just want to do it for myself, thank you very much. And they're portrayed in smear campaigns, et cetera, and we could all go down that. You could go and they get caught in a rabbit hole on that one. But essentially, if you're looking at a dependence on the state substituting for in the place of God, and once that dependence is on the state, it then goes from authoritarian to essentially totalitarian, and then you end up in a full-blown communist dystopia where you actually have no rights anymore to actually stand up and say, I am in the image of God, I am a sovereign individual, I can make the decisions for myself, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is that, the manifestation of that. I'm losing my word. It's not an individual. It is a.
And that's a power.
It is a beast.
Yeah,
in
that's
and of
a
itself.
beast.
Yeah,
that's a power. It's a spiritual power.
And that's where I think what you're saying, Dan, is you're not seeing this in an isolated incident anymore. This is happening globally. And anyone who stands up in any of those particular countries where this is happening goes, well, hang on a second. No, how about we let the individual decide, and they can, because essentially God has set up the family unit to be the foundation of society. And anyone a man stands up for his house and goes, no, I actually want to raise my kids in a particular way that I don't agree with what you're doing here. They say, oh, right-wing fascist. Oh, you're a toxic masculinity. All these things that go in along with all the things that are happening. And so you're seeing it all over the place where a strong, independent-minded man will stand up and say, I don't think that's right. That's not how I want to raise my family. That's not my wife, and I haven't decided to do that with our children. And they're denigrated, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're seeing this sweeping ethos across the globe. And that's, again, I think where we're talking about this ideology that, like I've already said, substitutes God with a system. And that's what we're watching.
I'm assuming too that's where the changing of laws come from, because at the end of the day, the power to change these things comes with the majority vote. We don't believe in all these strict rules and regulations, all these values or judgments in life, so therefore we'll create our own, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah,
leave it there.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.